Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and still with you on today's edition of The Breakfast Show. And of course, as promised earlier today, we are discussing a very interesting topic in our second segment, which is the Egyptian foreign policy, of course, an essential component of the Egyptian strategy, where Egyptian diplomacy has succeeded in maintaining very strong ties with many nations all around the world, as well as in the Arab region. Now, we are delighted to be joined over the telephone by His Excellency Ambassador Hassan, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. It's a very good morning to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning, madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for joining us this morning. And let's start by, discussing a bit the Egyptian foreign policy. How do you figure the role, that Egypt plays in several UN and its specialized agencies, as well as in various other international institutions, Mr. Ambassador, to foster issues related to international peace, security, as well as development, sir?
Well, as you may know, madam, Egypt is a founding member of the United Nations.
Yes.
And working in the context of the Charter of the United Nations has been a pillar of Egyptian foreign policy ever since. On the other hand, Egypt is a founding member, a leading founding member of the non-aligned movement that was launched in Bandung, Indonesia in April 1955. So these two, taken together, have shaped Egyptian foreign policy ever since. And that's the reason why the Egyptian foreign policy is a very active policy. We cover many international. We are members in many international and regional organizations. As a matter of fact, we are founding members of the Arab League, founding member of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, that became in 2002 the African Union. In addition, we have association agreements with other international organizations. So Egypt, due to its history, to its position at the heart of the Arab world, the Middle East, and let's say melting pot between Europe, Africa, and Asia, the Egyptian foreign policy has always reflected these facts. So nowadays, in the last 8 years, the Egyptian diplomacy has been very active on many fronts, foremost of which the African and the Arab world. And when I refer to the Arab world, I have in mind the Middle East and North Africa, because the Egyptian national security is directly related, directly impacted by any adverse developments in important geographic areas. And we have seen how Egypt has been actively engaged, involved in all peacekeeping efforts or peace efforts. In Libya, for instance, in fighting terrorism, in promoting African interests worldwide. So Egyptian foreign policy is very active. It is inspired by basic principles, and that's what makes it credible and successful.
Absolutely. Mr. Ambassador, now we've seen, Egypt having a very specific, approach to its relations with other countries, built on respect and non-interference in internal affairs of other nations. And Egyptian diplomacy also seeks to maintain strong bilateral and multilateral relationships, which is another essential goal of Egyptian foreign policy. To what extent do you see trips, for example, that President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has done to several Arab countries considered a major building stone in the relationship, as well as in Arab unity in the face of the current global challenges, sir?
Well, as far as the Arab world is concerned, of course, Egypt has always maintained a leading significant presence in Arab institutions within the Arab League, and has always called for strengthening joint Arab efforts and in facing foreign intervention in Arab affairs. And lately, in the last 10 days, we have seen how the President Sisi has been involved in various successive summits, whether in Egypt or during his last tour, latest tour in the Gulf, where he visited Oman and Bahrain. In all these visits and summits, President Sisi underscored basic principles that guide Egyptian foreign policy, working together, strengthening Arab solidarity, continuing foreign intervention in Arab affairs, and of course promoting the national security interests of Egypt and those of the Gulf countries and Jordan and Iraq.
Yes,
and
indeed.
also President of Egypt during these summits and in the latest tour of President Sisi in the Gulf, of course, has been coordinating with its Gulf partners, Gulf allies, and Jordan and Iraq, coordinating an Arab position once the summit, the unprecedented summit that would bring the American President Joe Biden with the leaders of the Gulf and Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq in Saudi Arabia next month. Of course, Egypt has been trying to promote, to articulate an Arab position that will be defended and explained and debated with the American President next month.
Absolutely. Mr. Ambassador, of course, Egypt has always had a very prominent role in the African continent, even though it had witnessed in the last pre-revolution days and years a bit of, turbulence here and there. But in light of, all the recent activity that Egypt has done with the African Union, its leadership of the African Union, and of course the efforts by the Egyptian state and President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in really building very strong African ties, his reception of many African leaders in Egypt over the last few years has really done a great deal to revive African bilateral ties and relations with many African nations. How important do you see this, and how does it remain a main pillar of supporting African ties with Egypt?
Well, as I said earlier, Madam, Egypt is a founding member of the former Organization of African Unity back in 1963, which became later the African Union. And we have been playing a very active role in African politics and African institutions. And of course, we in the last 8 years, we have built on the historic role that Egypt had played in the 50s and the 60s in promoting and defending African liberation movement. So Egyptian-African relations are anchored in history. And in the last 8 years, of course, we have energized, if I may put so, we have energized our contact with the African continent. And we have seen in this context that President Sisi, for instance, visited countries that no Egyptian president had ever visited, like the Ivory Coast, like Djibouti. Yes. So Egypt is of course, is conscious of the development taking place in Africa, and we are coordinating with our African partners within the African Union in order to promote African interests and to defend these interests in international institutions.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Hassan Haridy, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you so much, sir, for your time and your insight on today's edition of The Breakfast Show. And just before we leave you, we wrap up with a report where the Egyptian women have played a pivotal role throughout history, of course, standing side by side with men, paving the way for future successes. And of course, during the 30th of revolution, this did not change. Egyptian women drew a brave example of patriotism and sacrifice. And to wrap up this edition of The Breakfast Show, we leave you with this report. My name is Angie Meher. Thank you for watching.